What up, everybody? Hoya Rock from Smoke AD. You're listening to Aftershocks TV, baby.
Yeah, but yeah, but leading into that, we were talking, before, like I said, about Fear Factory changing their sound, and really maybe trying to go back to it, and it just never. They couldn't. As they say, sometimes you can't go back home, right?
Sure.
And that was kind of them. But we've seen now a lot of bands over the years that were able to kind of return the glory from their old sound after trying to change things up. Like, obviously the most, I think, obvious one is a Machine Head, going from, to the new metal, then going back to metal and really taking over in the 2000s.
Right.
I was going to say, but there's been bands over the years that have done that. And it's interesting to see ones who have been successful and some that haven't. Obviously we could get into, like, for instance, the Big Four. I mean, they all pretty much did it. The only one that didn't really do it was Slayer. I mean, yeah, they messed around with some.
Too. Yeah,
they did with some new metal sound. Of course, they did it.
And punk. Let's not forget the punk album too.
That's true. I forgot about that. That's right. They had their mo. The 90s. I guess you have to, for those bands in the 80s, you had to kind of wash out the 90s because they had to. They had no choice but to experiment and get, because there was nothing else. Nobody was going to buy what they were, or what they were selling, that used to sell. I mean, Anthrax, obviously, I think they, between them and Metallica, they did the biggest change. Megadeth, they just had the Risk one, and they just didn't have some good albums there.
They just had bad records.
Yeah, they just had bad records. So I guess when you think of the 80s to the 90s, okay, like I said, they kind of were forced to. Now, with some of the bands in the 90s was interesting that did it. They weren't necessarily forced to, because in the 90s, too, remember, with the alternative label, it was okay to have, like, a real freaking metallic sounding song, and then like a Faith No More, or whatever.
Sure.
They would go over the place, but it was okay to do that. It was accepted. You know what I mean? But some, like I look at a band like Clutch. I always said that they started up super heavy.
Yeah.
Went bluesy. Then they got a little heavier again with the Earth Rocker thing, but they never see. There some of those bands. I think in the 90s, it was like it's allowed. Like, even now, if they went and did stuff like that, fans don't care. They almost expect, or they're okay with it if they go ahead and do something completely different. You know what I mean? It doesn't won't break them. You know what I mean? I mean, because even in the 90s, think about those death metal bands from the 80s had to do it. You had Obituary and Morbid Angel changed up their sound. Morbid Angel went like industrial in one of their fucking records and shit.
Sure.
But
Danzig.
That's a good one.
Remember Danzig? Remember industrial? Was
right.
it Danzig 5, I think, or 7 or something?
I forget which number.
The one with the snakes. I think it's called Circle of Snakes or something.
Someone, Tommy Victor he was a guitarist on that one.
Yeah,
that's right. Circle of Snakes.
But that's like straight on industrial.
Total industrial. Yeah, I mean it's pretty. But you look at, like, all right, Sepultura. You know what I mean? I know they started in the 80s, but they were a 90s band. We said them, right? They went. I mean, all over the place. Now, it's interesting because obviously they splintered. But then look at Soulfly. Let's look at them.
Well, Soulfly is just roots carried forward.
It was until the
recently,
mid 2000s, when Rizzo was like, let's go and do some thrashy shit again. Let's get back to the Sepultura sound. But they never really, though, took off with that sound. Even though I love those records with Mark. Sure. I think those are probably the best Soulfly records. But I think, and I've heard recently, they're now going back to that new metal sound.
The hip hoppy thing?
Going back to the new metal.
Well, you know what, though? They can, because Max has so many other outlets now.
Well, you're right. They can. And not only that, also Soulfly's known for that. I mean, originally they were one of the biggest new metal bands.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Soulfly fans want Jump the Fuck Up, not
exactly,
not enslaved or
the Titans, and they don't want that stuff. Exactly, yeah.
They want Rise of the Primitive and shit like that.
Exactly, they do. No, you're
right. They do. But dude, there's been the weird. You sent me this topic, and I was thinking about it, and I guess I have a question on the ground rules for this topic, because I can name a shit ton of bands that changed their sound, but they also changed their audience when they changed their sound.
Okay.
So like they're still considered successful, but to us old heads, we hate it. Opeth. That's
Okay.
number one. Opeth went from death metal
death
to
metal.
dreary, boring bullshit.
Well, they're progressive rock. is what
Yeah.
they are. Yeah.
Amorphous.
I was going to bring them up too. Exactly. Yep.
Amorphous death metal to
Yep. To whatever. I mean,
whatever this is now.
I know.
Croony, progressive stuff.
Yeah.
You know, another band that changed their sound, got way bigger, but I don't know that it's better. Killswitch Engage.
Yeah.
When they brought Howard Jones in, they all of a sudden were a singing band.
Well, that's what it was, and that's well. Here's the thing with them. I think they're the kind of band that I see. I think. See, no, I thought about them myself, and I was like, well, did they change enough of their sound? They did get singy, but you could technically say, well, they had those clean vocals at the start. You know what I mean? I mean, they were back and forth, you know, and they were definitely heavier. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
They definitely softened up. So it's not. I would say more of like I'll give you a great example.
Okay.
Probably the biggest one is Suicidal Tendencies. So Suicidal start off hardcore punk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then they go crossover thrash. Then I mean you can even say obviously, and then even in the '90s they threw some funk in there when they got Trujillo. You know they did like the funk metal a little bit. They put a little bit of that in there. But they after their last the Suicidal for Life record. When they got rid of Rocky George and the other guy, Mike Clark, the guitarist, then they went straight back to the punk, you know, hardcore punk stuff. But it has not held up. You know what I mean? They're not. And I'm going to be quite honest. And my buddy probably is, you know, not going to agree with me. But I saw them a handful of years ago, man, and it was not good. You know, it was at some like beer festival thing. It was like a punk beer festival thing, and I was excited to see it. I hadn't seen them in years. It was outside, so sometimes the sound is not the best outside. I get it. But it was just, for one, they only played a few of the classic, you know, thrasher songs, and they were a little bit more of the slow ones. And this is when they had Lombardo on drums, so I'm thinking, all right, they're going to get into some shit, but they don't have those guitarists there, and because of that, they're not playing anything off of, you know, How I Left Tomorrow. They were not playing anything off of Lights, Camera, Revolution. They played like I would say probably three. They played You Can't Bring Me Down. They played like 3 or 4 songs. But they played most of the stuff off the first 2 records, you know, back in the day, you know, the earlier stuff. War Inside My Head, and of course, it institutionalized. Sure. And and it's just, and then the guitar work, you can't, because they got one guitarist, or they had 2 guitarists, but they don't have Rocky George, dude. He's an amazing guitarist. You know,
what year was this?
This was about 2019, I believe it was.
Okay, because I saw him in either 14 or 15, and they did play all those songs. You know, really? I saw him. Yeah, I saw him at Rock on the Range, and they played like a 30-minute set or whatever, and it was literally every song you just named.
Really? Okay.
You know, and so I wonder if they just changed. I wonder if that has anything to do with Mike not being able to do it anymore.
Well,
with the same energy.
I think it's possible. His voice, he can't do it. You know, his energy. I mean, his energy's still pretty good. He's still in great shape. Yeah. He was still up there doing his Psycho Myco thing, but it just, to me, when I think of Suicidal, you know, because when I got into them, obviously it was a little bit later. It was the thrash crossovers. It was when they had Rocky George with his leads and Mike Clark with those great riffs. You know, the guy they got now, Dean Pleasance, he's the Infectious Grooves guitarist. So it's not Suicidal. You know, and you can't just replace those guys and go out there and play that stuff. You can't do it. And so and not only that, they just haven't. You know, he went back to that sound on their albums. So the records they put out over the years, not many of them, but the ones that they do put out, it's all punk.
Sure.
It's punk shit. And it's just, you know, and to me, I don't see punk rockers lining up like crazy to go see them anymore. So they lost a lot of that audience. They really did the 2 sounds, and then they lost the thrash audience.
Well, they kind of cashed out the punk audience for the MTV audience is really what they've done.
Pretty much, yeah. You're right. You know, but they tried to go back and it didn't go.
No, it's not good. I mean, because
not punk. Punk's
not in punk. Once you're disloyal, you're disloyal. You're a fucking poser now.
Exactly. you can't do that shit. Exactly, man.
Yeah, exactly.
The other band that's pretty similar to Suicidal is Gwar, musically. You know, you listen to early Gwar. Early Gwar was very more skate punky. It was punk. It was more punk than it was metal. And then they got more metallic, you know, later on. And now, I mean, people just go to see Gwar for the show. They don't.
I was going to say. Do you think how many people? Honestly, how many people do you think can name 3 Gwar songs?
Most people probably can't.
How many people that have been to 10 Guar shows can name 3 Guar songs?
I think they could.
I don't think they could.
I'll-
Not
I'll-
out here. Not
well,
out here. No one gives a shit.
Really?
They
See,
just go for the show.
What shocked me about Guar was I was shocked at how many punks were into them. When I went to San Diego, there's a big punk scene down there, and I was shocked at how many people were like loved Guar, these guys. And I'm like, really? I mean, you don't like metal? Like, dude, Guar was not so much metal in the early days because I wasn't aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was listening to, and they were putting on some of these older records of the first couple of albums, and I'm like, oh yeah, like Scum Dogs of the Yard. I think it was like their second one. I think it was. I mean, that's really real punk, man. I mean, very.
Sure.
I guess the skate punk, so it had some. It was like a Suicidal. It was very much like that. But yeah, they just like you said. I mean, yeah, these days they're just obviously more of a novelty band just for the show. Not many people are going to actually hear whatever songs. But these punkers down in San Diego though, they love their Guar. They were singing word for word these songs. I'm like, holy shit, man. I just thought they were a straight up fucking metal band. I never thought punks were in them, but they weren't. Obviously, In Flames. There's another one.
Same as Amorphous.
Same
Same
Amorphous.
exact. Started death metal. Now they're just metal. I don't know what you call rock.
Well, they started as that melodic death metal. Yeah, then he went to like alt metal.
Yeah.
Like alternative metal. I mean, with clean vocal, like real clean vocals. And they just haven't regained that. I mean, they were fucking huge.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even here in the States, they were big. Back in the day.
Clayman is just such a great record.
Great record, yeah, man. Yeah.
And I can't even name the last 2 or 3 or 5. There's one, The Route to Remains.
Yeah.
I think it's like a white cover, but I don't even know. I lost all interest in them because of the change. That's one band that I personally get, but I know that there is an audience for them though, because they're still able to come over here and tour, and that usually is an indicator that there's people that wanna. If a foreign band like that can come over here and tour, it's usually because there's an audience.
True. You're right over here. You're right.
Yeah.
But listen, I remember. Yeah, they were headlining shit over here. You know what I mean? But I don't see them doing that anymore. I mean, not that. I'm not saying yes. I get it. It's an older band, and you can't really expect that. But I just don't see any buzz for them. You know what I mean? Even though they've been back and everything, it wasn't like oh great. I don't know. One person, let's put it that way, that's been like, dude, this is great, and Flames is back, man. I can't wait to see them. I haven't heard anyone because I really think they lost a lot of those fans when they changed.
Well, they did, and you know, and I don't know anybody who celebrates their records either.
No,
nobody talks. Flames record comes out and it's gone, and nobody notices. Like I said, I can't even name the last fucking 10, maybe 5.
No.
I don't even know how many.
Exactly.
I
mean, and even subtle changes. Like I'll bring up a band, a deathcore band, Whitechapel. They started putting some clean vocals, I remember, and I loved it. That was my favorite stuff by them. I think it was 2015 or 16, Mark of the Blade. I love that record because it got a little bit more like just regular sort of, I don't say new metal, but more bouncy and groovy. And fans didn't like it, man, and they went right back. And their other albums after that, though, just really, I mean, they're still a big enough band, you know what I mean? But I don't see them really doing many of these, headlining a lot of these, bigger, extreme metal festivals like they used to do. For a while, they were
on the cusp,
man.
Them and Job for a Cowboy were right on the cusp of overtaking Cannibal Corpse and 6 Feet Under and like the old guard.
Exactly. Yes.
And I honestly still think, and it's weird because Whitechapel changed their sound and kind of went by the wayside, and Job for a Cowboy just disappeared for a decade.
Yeah.
They just came back, and their current album as good as anything they've ever done. And but that 10-year gap is just fucking them.
It is, but they kept their sound.
They did keep their sound, yeah.
They didn't change it, and I think that's the important thing. Yeah. And the last one I'll bring up here just to wrap it up. Well, I guess there's 2.
Well, I've got a couple too still.
Oh, good. All right. Well, let me shut up then. You go ahead and throw yours out there. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is a full-on sound change, but it was definitely a sound change directionally. Arch Enemy.
Great. That's very good. Good one, dude.
Because before Angela, they were like straight up
brutal metal, brutality.
And then they became like kind of kill switch engagey.
Exactly. Yep.
And now you got Alyssa in there, and
it's not the same.
she's mixing in cleans.
exactly.
Cleaner. So they're really changing their sound there. Another one that started super heavy and like this is a big directional shift. Lacuna Coil.
Yeah, that's a good one. You're right. I didn't even think about them. Good
Lacuna
point.
Coil early, they were a heavy band. Then Christina came in and brought that, that symphonic thing to it. And not that I dislike it. I love it. And I love Christina.
Sure.
But that's a big change. And then the last one I got, and this is more subtle, and I don't think it hurt them any, Seven Dust.
Okay.
Seven Dust, those first, 4 records were kind of nu metal, but enough for radio.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden they felt like they needed an integrity boost. So then they put out like 4 records in a row that were all really heavy. Next and, the middle records. But now the last 2 records, they've gone back to kind of the style of Home and Animosity and Seasons again.
Yeah,
they're back to that now. So it's not as hard of like the ones we've been mentioning are like really
hard changes. Yeah,
are really shifting your car from drive to reverse while going 100. This is more of a just downshifting a little bit or upshifting a little bit, but Seven Dust has changed their thing along the way as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, very good. I'm going to bring up one, Life of Agony, right? Started out
brilliant.
Rivers Runs Red, what a fucking album that was.
And ugly.
And ugly. And it started with ugly. They got a little more alternative and radio friendly. And then they went to the Soul Searching Sun. And like I said, don't get me wrong, there's a couple of songs in there I really like, but they were just really going for the radio rock. I mean, 110%.
Well, and Keith changed his voice.
Yeah,
that was the big. To me, that was the biggest problem with that record.
He did. He got all high. His tone got high and everything. Exactly. Yep.
Because that record does have some great songs. Heroin Dreams is the best song they ever wrote.
Well, Weeds. I think Weeds
is a great song too.
Yeah,
great song too. I mean, there's a lot of Tangerine. There's a lot of great songs on there that are not brilliant because I'd rather hear Keith doing them in that, and I do what to do, I do it.
Absolutely. That was such a unique voice he had. Yeah. It was so unique. No one sounded like that. And I was disappointed when he went away. And then, of course, they brought it. I remember when I was interning at Roadrunner at the time that album came out, Soul Searching Sun.
Yeah.
And trust me, they were pushing that hard.
Oh, I remember.
And that was the time I got there. I started working there right after Keith quit.
Okay.
And so they had the whole Whitfield Crane.
Right.
And I remember they were like playing it. They re-recorded those songs with him. Him. And I just remember because at Tangerine, they would play that shit over and over in the offices. Man, just hearing fucking Tangerine. And obviously that was a shit that fucking fell totally flat. That thing. He was in the band for about 2 minutes.
I saw one of those shows though.
Oh, you did really?
I did. They opened for Anthrax.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. It was a good show. I will say, Whit did a very. Whit is a goddamn chameleon. He's a chameleon.
Yeah, he can do a lot of things, man. Yeah. But yeah. So then my last one I have is obviously one of my favorite bands ever, Leeway. Leeway, those 2 first great records, and then they went alternative in the '90s. And it's funny because, of course, they have this. You were mentioning when I did that. You were saying. When we were talking, like, I'm surprised that there wasn't enough, stuff said about Leeway and so forth. Well, that's, I think, the reason. I think if they would have stayed more in the metallic realm, in the thrash realm, and kept it somewhat heavy. I mean, there's songs. It wasn't like it wasn't heavy, but it was alternative metal, is what it was. It wasn't metal. It was very radio friendly rock stuff, and like I said, I liked their second album. That the first one they put out, Adult Crash, was not good. I mean, people, we all try to say there's some good songs in there, and maybe they are, but you really had to listen hard, and then eventually you got there. But when I just put it on randomly, I'm like, man, the sound sucks, and it's just
any record that you had to listen hard to like is not good.
Exactly.
Because when you listen to it after 5 years away from it, you'll be like, this is shit.
Exactly. Yep. But their second one, the Open Mouth Kit, that was when I first heard it from the get go. Really well produced, but once again, it just wasn't them though. People know them for, and I think because of that, that's why a lot of people went away from them and just forgot about them because of those records. And they're like, well, they're not hardcore thrash anymore, and it's hard. It's as we're just seeing a lot of times with some of these bands. you can't go back home. You can't sit there and go, we're going to do this super hard left, change in direction. And then, all right, never mind, guys, we're back. We're going to do what we used to. Because when you do come back and do it, it always doesn't sound like it's genuine. I mean, sounds like you're forcing it just because that's what your fans want.
Do you think that it would be better, and I don't mean financially better because I know the answer is no, but I mean better for the fans if bands took the quote-unquote Caius method, I'll call it, which is when they change directions to change the name. Because you had Caius, and it sounds like Caius. But then when it didn't sound like Caius, it was Unita, or it was Moss Generator, or it was, whatever
Queens
other name, Queens of the Stone. They took the new direction to a new label. They put a new brand on it. Now, I know for the band, Caius would have probably been a whole different animal if they would have stayed in with the Queens of the Stone Age and just called that Caius. Now, then we'd be talking about Caius as one of the biggest bands of all time.
Sure.
But at the same time, I personally like the integrity, even though it makes all of them probably live in apartments instead of mansions.
I'm with you, dude. And look, and I think you're right. I think people could, if you want to look at a history lesson, that's a great lesson to look at. Because exactly, I mean, listen, I understand. Back then, the business was obviously a lot more money in it, and you'd have, as long as you were a band. I think thinking about Caius is, I'm just using them. They had such a cult following. Yeah, sure, they were on a major label, a cult following, but they weren't going to be able to, really, they took it as far as they could. They took it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It was just, they had new band members towards the end there, and it was just like, okay, where are we going with this thing? And by that time, like I said, they were around in the early 90s, so even late 80s, like 89, 90-ish.
Sure.
So now you're talking late 90s, the last record was about 96 or 97. So, yeah, I mean, it made sense for, Josh to go and say, well, I'm going to take this. Because you're right, because if you listen to actually Queens of the Stone Age and then you listen to Caius, they are completely different. I mean, yes, of course, they've got that, stonery, deserty sound. But, I mean, completely different types of music, no doubt.
And my point, though, is if they would have just kept calling it Caius, we'd be looking at Caius the same way we're looking at In Flames or Leeway or these bands that we're talking about. We'd be like, wow, that was a hard left. That was an Opeth left, as it's known in the business.
Yeah, Opeth,
that's what it would be. You'd be looking at it the same way. Now, I don't know if that would have been better or worse. It might have caused Queens not to be popular.
Well, of course. I mean, it was better for Josh. He's smart. He was, he obviously did the right move. You know what I mean? And he also had the right connections. I mean, look at that. That's an example where, he had the connections with, Dave Grohl and all those guys because of Caius touring with Nirvana and all that stuff. So having those connections, making those connections over the years, and John Garcia was more of a recluse kind of guy, supposedly, and he wasn't into the whole rock stardom world. That left Josh and these guys go and do your own thing, and they did. So I mean, yeah, it's like you said, I'm with you. I appreciate the integrity of it because if you look at that, you're right. I mean, if they would have kept going and just dragged it on as Caius, or if he would have came out with a Queens album and it didn't take off and then went back to Caius, I mean, who would have known? But I'm with you. I think it's always worth the integrity thing. I think you always take the high road and the integrity thing. Like you said, it's easy for me to say because I wasn't a touring musician, of course. I get it. But if you're looking for legacy, you got to go with integrity. Then if you're looking for the quick, buck and the quick fix, you're looking at In Flames. You know what I mean? And now Fear Factory. You know what I mean? So I mean that's kind of the thing. Now I guess we could just spin that off into our last segment because you're talking about integrity.